A millionaire asks a nurse to pretend to be his friend for 24 hours. Hello, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories. Harrison Blake was sitting in his luxurious mansion, surrounded by a deafening silence that seemed to amplify his loneliness. The walls, adorned with family photos, told stories of laughter and celebrations that now seemed distant. He looked at one of these photographs in which Clara, his daughter, smiled with her teeth bared, revealing a glow of happiness he hadn't seen for years. The image was a painful reminder of all that had been lost, of a relationship that had been torn apart by unspoken words and misunderstandings. The sound of footsteps echoed on the marble floor, bringing with them the presence of Sarah Mitchell, a kindly-looking nurse. As she entered, she noticed the opulence around her, but what struck her most was the aura of sadness that enveloped Harrison. His gaze carried a depth of pain, and for a moment she found herself recognizing a fragility she had only ever seen in herself. "Good afternoon, Mr. Blake," she said, trying to break the ice. "How are you feeling today?" "I'm not sure I can say that I feel well, Sarah," replied Harrison, his voice weak and shaky. He looked away from the photo and faced the nurse. "Loneliness is a heavy burden, especially when you have so much to lose." Sarah nodded, realizing the weight of the words. "Loneliness can be really hard to bear. I'm here to help in any way I can." Harrison hesitated for a moment, his eyes straying back to the photographs. "Actually, I have an unusual request to make." His voice faltered for a moment, as if the very concept of what he was about to ask intimidated him. "I'd like you to act as if you were my daughter, Clara, for one day. Just for one day." Sarah was surprised. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blake. I didn't quite understand. Would you like me to—" "Yes," he interrupted, feeling a mixture of shame and despair. "Clara and I had a disagreement, a bitter fight. Since then, she's drifted apart. I'm terminally ill, and I want to make up before it's too late. I don't have many days left." Sarah felt a twinge of empathy. "That's quite a request. But why me?" "Because you're kind, and you seem to understand what pain is," he replied, his gaze penetrating. "I want you to represent Clara, even for a few hours. I just want to be able to tell her how much I love her, how sorry I am." Reluctant, but touched by his vulnerability, Sarah took a deep breath. "It's a big responsibility, Mr. Blake. I don't know if I can do it. Please," he begged, his voice weakening. "I need this opportunity. I need to feel that I can still have something with my daughter, even if it's on a symbolic level." Feeling that the situation demanded more than a simple no, Sarah looked into Harrison's eyes and saw the fragility of a man who, despite all his power and wealth, was desperate for a human connection. "Okay, I accept," she finally said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions that surrounded her. "I'll do my best." Harrison smiled, a smile that seemed to carry a weight of gratitude. "Thank you so much, Sarah. You don't know how much this means to me," he said, his voice now a little stronger. "Let's create a space where I can open up and talk about Clara. I want to share the memories, the joys, and above all, the regrets." And so, in that environment of luxury and solitude, an unexpected journey of redemption and reconciliation began. Harrison Blake was sitting in a dark leather armchair, surrounded by an environment that reflected his life of achievements and glory. The walls of the room were adorned with trophies and awards, each telling a story of success and power. However, behind each shiny object, there was a deep emptiness. He looked at one photograph in particular, where Clara, his estranged daughter, was smiling next to him on a sunny day, innocence and joy imprinted on their faces. That image seemed like a distant echo of a happier time, before words hurt and resentments built up. Meanwhile, Sarah Mitchell, the nurse hired to look after him, watched in silence. She only had a day to absorb everything Harrison had to share, but she knew that every second would be crucial. Harrison's gaze was penetrating, and she could see his vulnerability. "You're lonely, aren't you?" she said, breaking the silence that hung in the air. Harrison sighed, his chest tightening. Loneliness is a constant guest. It's strange, isn't it? In the midst of so much success, it's easy to get lost. He looked at the window, as if expecting something or someone to appear outside. I've made mistakes. A lot of mistakes. Sarah tilted her head, encouraging him to continue. Mistakes are part of life, Harrison. What matters is how you deal with them. He shook his head, a sad smile appearing on his lips. I walked away from my daughter. Clara and I had an unbearable argument. I put too much pressure on her. I wanted her to follow in my footsteps, and I never listened to her. Now I'm here, about to leave, and all I want is for her to know that I'm sorry. How do you imagine you can do that? Sarah asked, her voice soft but firm. I want you to represent her. For one day, act as if you were her. I need you to listen to the stories I have to tell. I need you to bring them to her. Harrison sounded small, almost childish in his plea. Sarah hesitated. The request was unusual and involved a lot of responsibility. You're asking a lot of me. I'm just a nurse, but you're more than that. You're a listener, and that's what I need most right now. Someone who can understand what I've lost. He stared at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and despair. She pondered, sensing the gravity of the situation. All right, Harrison, I'll do it. But you have to be honest. I can't represent anything other than yourself. I promise. I'll open my heart. He smiled, a genuine trace of gratitude on his face. As the hours passed, Harrison began to share stories of Clara, from her first steps to her academic achievements. His voice, although weak, carried a passion that Sarah hadn't expected to find. She was always so curious. Once, when she was 5, she decided she wanted to be an astronaut. She spent weeks building a rocket out of cardboard. I laughed, thinking it was just a phase. And you didn't believe her? Sarah asked, interested. I should have, but I was so caught up in my ambitions, in my image, that I didn't realize that the real achievement was to let her dream. The pain in his voice was palpable, and tears began to form in his eyes. Sarah, touched, remembered her own experiences. Sometimes parents don't realize the impact they have on their children's lives. I lost my family a few years ago. What I'm left with are the memories and the lessons I learned the hard way. Sorry to hear that, Harrison murmured, his empathy emerging. How do you deal with it? I've learned to accept pain and find a new path. And in a way, here I am, listening to you and helping to heal wounds that are not only yours, but also mine. The connection between them grew, and Harrison began to open up even more. He talked about his failings as a father, the pressure he put on Clara, and how lost he felt without her in his life. I let her go, and now I don't know if there's still time to fix it. Maybe it's not too late, Sarah replied, encouraging him. Love always finds a way, even if it takes time and courage to recognize it. Harrison looked into her eyes, feeling a new strength welling up inside him. Do you really believe that? Yes, I believe it. And you should too. And the first step towards reconciliation, said Sarah, a hopeful smile forming on her lips. As the night progressed, Harrison's stories became more and more emotional, and the memories shared between them created a safe space where they could both confront their vulnerabilities and hopes. Harrison's mind was made up. The idea of reconciling with Clara was not just a matter of pride, but a deep desire to heal the wounds that had driven him away from his daughter. He knew he needed to face his fears and regrets, and for that, he turned to Sarah. The nurse who until then had been just a stranger in his mansion now became his confidant and ally on this emotional journey. "Sarah," he began, his voice shaky but firm, "I need you to help me write a letter to Clara. I want her to know how sorry I am for everything that's happened. I can't leave without trying to make things right." Sarah, sensing the intensity of the moment, replied softly, "Of course, Harrison. What would you like to say to her?" He hesitated for a moment, struggling with his emotions. "I want to ask for forgiveness. But not just that. I want her to know about my dreams as a father, about the moments I missed and will never have again." "That's important," Sarah said, encouraging him to continue. "If you share your unfulfilled dreams, maybe it will touch her heart. Clara might understand that you're not just a flawed father, but someone who's also suffered the consequences of your choices." Harrison nodded, his mind already occupied with the memories he wanted to include. "I always dreamed of seeing her graduate, of accompanying her in her achievements, but instead I was so focused on business that I let those moments pass me by. Now all I have are memories and regrets." As the pen danced across the paper, the atmosphere in the room became charged with emotion. With every word they wrote together, Harrison seemed to release a weight from his shoulders. "I remember when Clara learned to ride a bike," he began, his voice breaking. "I promised I'd be there to see her, but I barely got out of work that day." Sarah watched, her heart squeezing as she realized Harrison's vulnerability. "This is hard, I know, but you're doing a brave thing by opening your heart. Clara needs to know that you care." "I just hope she can forgive a father who has done so much wrong," he murmured, tears starting to form in his eyes. "I just want her to know that I love her, and that, no matter how much I've failed her, I've always loved her." "Sometimes forgiveness starts with honesty," Sarah said, encouraging him to continue. "Don't just focus on what you've lost, but also on what you can still build on. Tell her you're willing to try again, even if it takes time." Harrison paused for a moment, reflecting on Sarah's words. "Maybe I should include that in the letter," he agreed, his determination growing. "Say that I'm ready to listen, to understand, and to change." And so the letter became a cathartic moment, not only for Harrison, but also for Sarah. As he wrote about his fears and regrets, Sarah felt that somehow he was also opening a door to his own inner struggles. "You know," she began hesitantly, but feeling inspired by his vulnerability, "I also have a history of loss. Once I lost my mother, and that made me realize that we often don't have enough time to fix things." Harrison turned to her, his eyes shining with understanding. "What happened?" he asked, interested. "She got sick and I was so focused on my career, just like you. By the time I realized I needed to be there for her, it was too late." "I always wish I'd told her how much I loved her before she left," Sarah confessed, her voice breaking. "It taught me that life is short, and that we should make the most of every moment." Sarah's sincerity resonated deeply with Harrison. He realized that, despite their differences, they shared a similar pain. Perhaps in writing this letter, I'm not only trying to reconcile with Clara, but also with the part of me that has become estranged from the people I love, he reflected. "Exactly," Sarah smiled, touched by the connection they were forming. "And that's an important step, not just for you, but for all of us who wish to heal." As they continued to write, the room was filled with a new energy, as if hope was finally beginning to bloom among the shadows of the past. Harrison felt that, for the first time in a long time, he was on the right path to redemption, not only for Clara, but also for himself. After finishing the letter, Harrison looked at Sarah with an expression that mixed hope and apprehension. "Do you think Shell read it?" he asked, his voice still weak, but charged with an expectation he hadn't felt for years. Sarah hesitated for a moment, looking at the letter in her hands. "I hope so, Harrison. But more importantly, you need to believe that this is the only chance you have of connecting with her again. If she doesn't read it, at least you've done your bit." Harrison nodded, although the fear of being rejected still haunted him. "What if she doesn't want to hear from me? What if this letter just reopens wounds that were already healed? Then you'll have done what you can. The important thing is that you're trying." "Sometimes the courage to face the past is more powerful than any written word," Sarah replied, trying to convey a little hope. With the letter carefully folded and placed in an envelope, Sarah decided it was time to take it to the post office. She stood up, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. As she walked, she reflected on the courage Harrison had shown. He was exposing himself in a way that many men, especially those of his status, rarely did. When she arrived at the post office, Sarah sat on a bench nearby, watching people go by. A young mother, pushing a baby carriage, reminded her of her own childhood and losses. Life went on, regardless of the pain each person carried. The letter in her hand was like a symbol of Harrison's struggle, and in a way, her own. "Come on, Sarah, you can do it," she muttered to herself, getting up and walking over to the letterbox. With one last glance at the letter, she deposited it, and as she did so, felt a wave of relief and a slight smile appear on her face. When Sarah returned to the mansion, she found Harrison in an expectant position, his eyes shining with a mixture of hope and anxiety. "Did you send it?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Yes, I sent it," replied Sarah, feeling that this moment was more significant than she could have imagined. "Now, it's time to wait and see what happens." Harrison took a deep breath and smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his tired face. "You know, I can't thank you enough. You're not just a nurse. You've become a friend. And that's something I didn't expect." "I only did what anyone would do," Sarah said modestly, but an inner warmth enveloped her when she heard those words. "You deserve this chance, Harrison." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a gratitude that went beyond words. "I spent so much time isolated, in a bubble of success and loneliness, that I never realized how fundamental human connections are. You helped me see that." Sarah felt that there was something profoundly transformative in that conversation. Harrison's vulnerability touched her in a way she couldn't explain. In that moment, they were both united not only by their struggle, but also by a new understanding of what really mattered in life. "Perhaps through pain, we can find a path to healing," she commented, looking at the horizon that stretched beyond the mansion's window. "Life is full of new beginnings, isn't it?" "Yes, and I feel him ready for that fresh start," Harrison replied, a new sparkle in his eyes. He leaned back in his chair, as if the weight of a mountain was being lifted from his shoulders. "Thanks to you, Sarah." The atmosphere between them was charged with a new energy. There was a mutual understanding, a connection born of exposed wounds and shared vulnerability. Both were somehow rediscovering themselves and finding strength in each other. The journey of reconciliation that had begun with a simple letter had now become much more than that. It was a path to healing, not only for Harrison and Clara, but also for Sarah, who saw herself reflected in the billionaire's struggles. "Let's wait together," Sarah suggested, taking a seat next to Harrison. "No matter what happens next, you're not alone anymore." And for the first time in a long time, Harrison felt that there was someone by his side, ready to face the unknown, while they both waited for the next few hours to unfold, which could change their lives forever. Harrison Blake was sitting at the table in his luxurious living room, the soft morning light filtering through the heavy curtains. In front of him, the letter from Clara, his estranged daughter, lay open, and its words reverberated in his mind. He felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Sarah Mitchell, the nurse who had become his confidant over the last 24 hours, entered the room with a curious look on her face. "How are you feeling, Harrison?" she asked, her gentle voice breaking the tense silence that hung in the air. I don't know, Sarah. It's all so confusing," he replied, his eyes fixed on the letter. Clara answered, "But the words, they're harsh. She's still so hurt." Sarah came over and sat next to him, encouraging him to share his emotions. "Do you want to tell me what she said?" Harrison took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. "She talked about the pain I caused, how our fight made her feel abandoned. But at the same time, there was a desire to understand. She wants to know why I made the choices I did. She wants to know if I really love her." "That's a good sign," Sarah said, trying to be optimistic. "It means she still cares, and you can use that to your advantage." "You think?" I can only see the anger in her words. "It's like I've built a wall between us, and now she's trying to climb it, but she doesn't know how," he replied, his voice laced with emotion. "Sometimes anger is just the surface layer of pain," Sarah reflected. "She needs to know that you're willing to face it all, that you're ready to open up." Harrison looked at her, admiring her ability to see beyond words. "What do you suggest I do?" Answering her seems like a challenge. What if I screw up again? Be honest. Tell her how you feel. Invite her to a conversation. Sometimes written words don't have the same impact as spoken ones. "A meeting might be what you need," Sarah advised, her voice firm and sure. He shook his head, thinking about the possibility. What if she doesn't want to see me? What if I hurt her even more? You'll never know if you don't try. And remember, even if she doesn't accept your invitation straight away, you'll have taken the first step. "And that's important," she said, placing her hand on his in a gesture of support. Harrison felt her empathy envelop him like a cloak. "You're right. I have to try. I can't let another day go by without doing something. Clara deserves it." "Then let's write a response together," suggested Sarah, excited by the idea. "We can start with how you really feel, and then think about how you'd like the conversation to go." Harrison smiled, feeling lighter at the prospect of finally opening up to Clara. "Yes, let's do that. I want her to know that I'm here, that I'm ready to listen and learn." As they worked together on the letter, the atmosphere in the room began to change. Harrison's pain and regret turned to hope, and Sarah's presence brought unexpected comfort. He began to write, his hands trembling slightly as the words flowed. "Dear Clara, I know you're hurt, and am responsible for that. The choices I made in my life drove us apart, and am sorry I wasn't the father you deserved." Watching him, Sarah felt her heart squeeze. It was a moment of vulnerability that she had no idea she would witness. "That's a good start, Harrison. Keep going. I've always loved you, and even though I've made mistakes, my love for you has never diminished," he continued, his voice firmer now. "If you are willing, I'd love the chance to talk in person. I want to listen to you, understand your pain, and try to make things right this time." He read aloud what he had written, and Sarah was struck by the sincerity that came through in his words. "That's it, Harrison. That's the essence of what you need to say." "Do you think she'll answer me?" he asked, the doubt still present in his mind. "Yes, I really believe she will. And even if it takes a while, you've taken the first step towards reconciliation. And that's all you can do for now, Sarah encouraged, an encouraging smile on her lips. Harrison looked at the letter with a mixture of hope and apprehension, aware that there was a lot to lose, but also a lot to gain. Thank you, Sarah. You don't know how much this means to me. I'm just doing what I can. And I'm here for you, whatever happens, she replied, feeling more connected to him than ever. Their journey had only just begun, but for the first time, Harrison felt that there was a light at the end of the tunnel, a possibility of reconciliation that filled him with hope. Harrison was sitting in his favorite armchair, his gaze lost in the landscape of his luxurious mansion. The sunshine reflected off the walls adorned with paintings and trophies that told the story of a lifetime of achievements. But for him, it all seemed empty. With his health declining, loneliness had become his only companion. It was in this melancholy setting that he and Sarah were preparing for a moment that could change their lives. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Sarah asked, adjusting the position of her notebook, which was full of notes about the care she should take with Harrison. She saw his fragility, but also the determination in his tired eyes. Harrison stared at her with a sincerity she hadn't seen before. "I need this, Sarah. Not just for me, but for Clara. Time is running out, and I can't leave without trying to right my wrongs." His voice trembled, and Sarah felt her heart clench as she heard his confession. "I see. But you know the pressure can be too much for her, don't you?" Sarah tried to be cautious. Clara's last meeting with Harrison had been marked by shouting and disagreements, and the idea of forcing her to relive it made her apprehensive. "I know. But if I don't do it now, I may never get another chance," Harrison replied, the urgency in his words palpable. "I just want her to know that I'm here, willing to listen. Living with this weight is unbearable." With the meeting scheduled, Sarah tried to take the focus off Harrison, leading him to recall good moments he had shared with Clara. "Remember the day she won that dance prize? You were so proud." A sad smile formed on Harrison's lips. "Yes, I saw her shine on that stage. She was so happy, so full of life. And I was so busy thinking about business that I almost missed it. If only I'd paid more attention." The conversation continued, and as they shared memories, the tension began to dissipate a little. However, the expectation of an imminent reunion hung in the air like a heavy cloud. On the morning of the meeting, Harrison was visibly nervous. "What if I don't know what to say? What if she doesn't want to listen to me?" He looked at Sarah, searching for an answer that might calm him down. "You need to be honest, Harrison. Speak from your heart, as you did when you wrote the letter. Clara needs to know that you're willing to change." Sarah couldn't help but admire Harrison's determination, even in the face of fear. She was sure that vulnerability could open doors. As the time for the meeting approached, the atmosphere of expectation turned into anxiety. Harrison looked at his watch again and again, and with each passing second, his hope diminished. Then suddenly, the phone rang, breaking the silence. Sarah quickly answered. "Clara." "Hi, darling?" "Yes, he's waiting for you," said Sarah, her heart pounding, as she heard Harrison's daughter's voice on the other end of the line. "Oh, you can't come? I see. Yes, of course. You need time." Harrison watched in anguish as Sarah hung up the phone. "What happened?" he asked, his voice trembling. She won't be able to make it today," Sarah replied, her tone soft but firm. "She said she's not ready for this meeting." Harrison's expression changed, and disappointment turned to despair. I can't believe this is happening. I've waited so long for this opportunity." He dropped into a chair, his head between his hands. "Hey, Harrison, breathe. That doesn't mean it's over. She just needs time to process it all." Sarah approached, putting her hand on his shoulder. "You have a long way to go. What matters is that you've taken the first step. But what if I never get another chance? What if I can't fix it?" His voice was filled with sadness and discouragement. "Then you'll have to learn to accept that," Sarah said firmly. "Giving space may be what Clara needs now. Sometimes true love is also about letting the other person go." Harrison looked at Sarah, realizing that even in her pain, there was a wisdom in her words. "You're right. I've never been good at giving space. I've always wanted to control everything around me. But if I really want Clara to be happy, maybe I need to learn to wait." This conclusion brought a slight relief to Harrison's heart, even if the pain of rejection was still present. He knew that this was an important step, not only in his journey of reconciliation with Clara, but also in his own process of growth and acceptance. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a tiny spark of hope spring up inside him. After the rejection of the meeting, a heavy silence hung in Harrison Blake's luxurious mansion. Sarah Mitchell, the nurse who had become an unexpected confidant, walked through the room full of trophies and awards, each object carrying the story of a man who, despite his immense success, felt profoundly alone. The pain of Clara's rejection was still fresh, but in the midst of this sadness, something inside Sarah began to awaken. She took a deep breath and, with a resolute look, turned to Harrison. "You know, I understand a little of what you're going through. I'm not your daughter, but I've lost people I loved. And that made me realize that life is made up of new beginnings." Harrison, surprised by Sarah's sincerity, looked up at her. "Fresh starts? After everything that's happened, do you think it's possible to start again?" "I feel like I'm already very close to the end." "That's exactly why we need to talk about it," said Sarah, taking a seat next to him. "Pain can be overwhelming, but it can also teach us." "I lost my mother a few years ago, and for a long time I felt lost. But I've learned that every loss gives us the opportunity to look to the future, even if it seems bleak." He watched her carefully, noting the strength that emanated from her words. "How did you do it? What made you stand up again?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, remembering the long nights when she allowed herself to cry, but also the days when she decided she needed to move on. "I wrote. I began to put my feelings into words. Every tear, every memory, became a page. Since then, I've realized that I'm not defined by my losses, but by the choices I make from them." Harrison felt a weight lift off his shoulders. "Writing, do you think it could help me find a way to win Clara back?" "Absolutely. Writing can be a powerful way of connecting with what you feel and what you want to express. You have so much to share with her, and perhaps by putting it down on paper, you'll be able to let go of some of the pain you're carrying." He reflected on his words, realizing that throughout his life, he had always shied away from vulnerability. "Do you really believe that Clara still cares? That she wants to hear what I have to say?" "Yes, I believe it." A daughter's love never disappears completely, even when there are deep hurts. What you need to do is show her that you're willing to open up, face your mistakes, and become the father she deserves. The conversation lit a flame of hope inside Harrison. He looked at Sarah, admiring the courage she showed in sharing her own pain. "If I do this, it'll be a fresh start for both of us, won't it?" "Exactly. And you don't have to do it alone. I'm here to help in any way I can." That instant of connection became a cathartic moment. Harrison felt encouraged and determined to face his fears. "Let's do it," he said, his voice now firmer. "I want to write this letter not only to Clara, but also to myself, to free myself from the chains of the past." Sarah smiled, seeing the determination in his eyes. So, let's get started. What would you like to say to her? Harrison took a deep breath, his mind already buzzing with thoughts and emotions. I want to start by apologizing. I want her to know that I recognize my mistakes and that I'm deeply sorry for not being the father she deserved. Sarah nodded, encouraging him to continue. That's a good start. Now, try to put into words the feelings you've been harboring. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. As he began to write, the words flowed, as if a dam were breaking. Harrison poured his soul into each sentence, and Sarah, by his side, felt inspired by his courage. She realized that, like him, she also had her own internal battles to face. "Can you see the beauty in that, Harrison?" Sarah said, as he wrote. "You're allowing yourself to feel, and that's a huge step." "Yes, I see," he replied, his voice breaking. "And I feel that, in doing so, I'm not only seeking Clara's forgiveness, but also forgiving myself for everything I didn't do." Exactly, and that's essential for finding peace. The night advanced, and the shadows in the room became longer. But inside Harrison, a light was beginning to shine. He was no longer just waiting for an uncertain future. He was taking charge of his life, willing to face the ghosts that haunted him. And by his side, Sarah became a companion on this journey of redemption, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, hope can be reborn. Harrison Blake looked out of the window of his mansion, watching the sun set over the horizon, dyeing the sky orange and pink. The luxurious atmosphere around him seemed to contrast with the loneliness that surrounded him. The photographs on the wall, which had depicted happy family moments, were now just a reminder of everything he had lost. He felt the weight of pain in his chest, a pain that was not just physical, but emotional. His daughter Clara's departure had left a void that seemed impossible to fill. When Sarah Mitchell arrived, he noticed that she had an air of kindness about her, but also a look that spoke of her own battles. She entered the hall, where the smell of polished wood and fresh flowers mingled with the atmosphere. Harrison took a deep breath, knowing that this moment was crucial. His voice weak, he began to share his request. "Sarah, I need you to do something for me," he said, hesitant but determined. "I want you to act as if you were my daughter Clara for a day." The nurse frowned in surprise. "But Mr. Blake, I don't understand. Why me? She walked away from me after a fight. I don't know if he'll have time to reconcile with her." "I want to make up before it's too late," Harrison explained, his voice trembling as he said the words. Sarah's gaze softened as she realized the billionaire's vulnerability. She felt a surge of empathy, and, although reluctant, accepted the challenge. "All right, I'll do it for you," she replied, her words laden with compassion. "But I promise it will be a day to remember, not just an act." As the evening progressed, they sat down in a room full of trophies and awards. Harrison began to tell stories about Clara, his achievements, but also the mistakes he made as a father. His eyes sparkled as he recalled the moments when Clara was still a child, his laughter echoing through the house. Sarah listened attentively, identifying with his pain. "I remember the first time she won a dancing trophy," commented Harrison, a sad smile on his lips. "She was so happy. I should have been more supportive of her choices." "You're human too, Mr. Blake. We all make mistakes," said Sarah, her voice soft. "The important thing is to recognize that and want to change." Tears formed in Harrison's eyes as he opened up about his loneliness and sadness. "I never wanted her to feel that way. I just wanted to be a good father." "Sometimes it takes courage to face the past and seek reconciliation," Sarah said, feeling that the moment was cathartic for both of them. Determined to make amends, Harrison decided he needed to write a letter to Clara. He enlisted the help of Sarah, who sat beside him as he began to put his feelings into words. "Write down what you really feel," Sarah suggested. "Not just an apology, but also your unfulfilled dreams as a father. That might touch her heart." The words began to flow, and Harrison found himself pouring his soul into the letter. He felt a growing lightness as he talked about his regrets, his fears, and his hopes. Sarah, by his side, also found the courage to open up about her own struggles, revealing how loss had shaped her. After finishing the letter, Harrison read it aloud, and Sarah felt the weight of emotion in every word. "Do you think she'll understand?" he asked uneasily. "I hope so." "It's worth a try," Sarah replied, reflecting on the impact the letter could have. "Sometimes hope is all we have." Determined to help, Sarah sent the letter, watching as the envelope disappeared into the letterbox. Over the next few days, she noticed a change in Harrison. He began to open up more, to smile a little more, as if the simple act of writing had lifted a weight from his shoulders. "You should write a diary," Sarah suggested in a conversation. Sessions later. "It might help you process everything you're feeling." Harrison looked at her gratefully. "I never thought something so simple could be so liberating," he said. "I feel lighter, as if I'm finally freeing myself from the chains of the past." The connection between them grew stronger every day. Harrison, now more hopeful, began to believe that maybe, just maybe, reconciliation with Clara was possible. Their journey, marked by pain and vulnerability, became a story of redemption and new beginnings. Clara finally decided to confront her father. After weeks of pondering, spurred on by the words he had sent her through Sarah, she arrived at the mansion, nervous but determined. The elegant wrought-iron gate opened slowly, revealing the grandeur of the house, which, although imposing, now seemed shrouded in a pall of expectation and anxiety. Clara took a deep breath, adjusting the blouse she was wearing, a casual choice, but one that sought to convey an air of lightness at such an emotionally charged moment. Harrison was sitting in an armchair near the window, his face illuminated by the soft, late afternoon light. When he saw her come in, his heart raced. He didn't know what to expect, but his daughter's presence brought a mixture of hope and fear. "Clara," his voice sounded low, almost a whisper. "You've come." "Yes, Dad." I needed this," Clara replied hesitantly as she crossed the space between them. "I needed to see you." Harrison struggled to get up, but the weakness of his body made him hesitate. Clara walked over to him, her eyes reflecting a whirlwind of feelings. "You don't have to get up." "Let's talk anyway," she said, with a gentleness he hadn't expected. The two sat down, the distance between them now seeming smaller. Clara looked at her father, searching for the right words. "I read your letter. Your words, they touched me, but I'm still confused. I don't know where to start." Harrison felt a knot forming in his throat. "I'm confused too, Clara. I don't know how I let things get to this point. Life has made me realize that time is precious, and I'm sorry for everything. You've always been so distant. I just wanted you to be there, to see me," Clara said, a tremor in her voice. "I didn't need your money. I just needed your love." "I know," he replied, sincerity pulsing through his words. "And I failed miserably. I had the chance to be a better father, and I let pride and work take over. But I want to change that. Please tell me how." Tears began to run down Clara's face, and she wiped them away quickly, trying to keep her composure. "It's hard, Dad. I don't want this conversation to turn into a fight. I just want to understand you. Understand why you walked away. I walked away because I was afraid. Afraid of not being the father you needed. Afraid of disappointing you. Harrison confessed, his voice breaking. "But that doesn't justify my absence. I wanted you to know that I always loved you, even when I didn't know how to show it." Clara, now calmer, began to open her heart. "I loved you too, even when I was hurt. I just wanted you to see me as a person, not as an extension of your image or your success. I wanted you to care about how I felt." "I understand that now," he said, his gaze fixed on hers, searching for a genuine connection. "And am ready to listen. What do you feel? What do you need from me?" "I just need your presence, your sincerity. I want us to be able to start again, even if that means being strangers at first. I don't want you to treat me like the billionaire's daughter, but like Clara, your daughter, who just wants to rebuild what was broken." Harrison nodded, emotion overflowing from his chest. "That's all I want too. A fresh start. I may not have all the answers, but I'm willing to learn, to listen. I want you to know that I'll be here whenever you need me." At that moment, Sarah, who was watching from a distance, felt a wave of satisfaction. She had been the bridge between them, and now, seeing the sincere exchange of feelings, she felt fulfilled for having contributed to this reunion. What had begun as an unusual request had turned into something much greater, a true journey of reconciliation that transcended pain. "I'm grateful for that," murmured Clara, still teary-eyed, but now with a slight smile. "For what you did, for listening to me." "I'm grateful to you for coming," replied Harrison, a glimmer of hope lighting up his tired eyes. "Let's move forward, together." The meeting that seemed impossible now became a new chapter, where love, understanding, and vulnerability intertwined, paving the way for what could be a brighter future. The atmosphere in Harrison Blake's mansion had changed. The echo of laughter and lively conversation that had once filled the corridors had given way to a heavy silence that seemed to suffocate the few remaining moments of hope. Clara finally stood in front of her father, and the tension was palpable. She looked at him, her heart torn between anger and the love she had always felt. Harrison, for his part, stared at his daughter, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. Time seemed to have stopped, and they were about to take the first steps on a path that they both knew would be painful, but necessary. "I always knew our relationship was complicated, Dad," Clara began, her voice trembling slightly. "But I never stopped loving you. I just wish you'd realized it sooner." Her words sounded like a breath of life in the midst of his cooling emotions. Harrison felt a knot unravel in his chest, and hope began to sprout like a resilient flower in barren ground. "Clara, I don't know how to apologize to you enough for everything that happened. For not being the father you needed," Harrison said, the sincerity in his voice echoing off the walls of the mansion. He remembered how he had failed at crucial moments, how the pursuit of success had taken him away from his daughter. "But I want to change that. I want to try again." She looked him in the eye, and for a brief moment, the pain of the past seemed to dissipate. "Maybe we should start again, as if we were strangers," Clara suggested, swallowing. "A meeting, a conversation, without the hurts that have held us here." Harrison nodded, feeling a mixture of joy and sadness. "Yes, I'd love that. We can get to know each other again, this time without barriers." He took a deep breath, realizing that this was the opportunity he had always wanted, the chance to rebuild what had been destroyed. As the two continued to talk, Sarah, who was standing in the doorway, watched with a smile on her face. She had become a bridge between father and daughter, and the satisfaction in her heart was palpable. Harrison was not only reconnecting with Clara, but also finding a new reason to live, something he had never imagined would happen. "Thank you, Sarah," said Harrison, turning to her with gratitude in his eyes. "You've helped me to see what really matters, not just about Clara, but about myself." "I just did what a compassionate heart would do," Sarah replied, feeling moved. "Change comes from within, Harrison. Sometimes we need someone to remind us of what we really want." The three of them shared a moment of silence, where the weight of unspoken words and regrets began to dissipate. The heavy atmosphere of the mansion was transformed, and a new radiance seemed to invade the room. "Where do we start?" Clara asked, her eyes lighting up with new hope. "Maybe we could meet for coffee, or a walk in the park. Something simple, where we can talk and get to know each other again," Harrison suggested, the smile widening on his face. "I'd love that," Clara replied, and so, for the first time in a long time, she felt that something beautiful could emerge from the ashes of a troubled past. Sarah, observing the transformation, thought that true redemption was not just about forgiving or being forgiven, but about allowing new beginnings to flourish. And there, in that mansion that had been a symbol of loneliness and regret, now stood a new story, a story of love, reconciliation, and hope. The future was still uncertain, but at that moment they were ready to face whatever came their way, together. The journey of redemption that had begun with an unusual request had become a new life, and the bond between them, although fragile, was now stronger than ever. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.